There could be more bad news for commuters if tube drivers vote in favour of a fresh wave of strikes in March. It's emerged today that members of the ASLEF union will be balloted later this month in an ongoing dispute over pension changes. Our political correspondent Simon Harris is at Farringdon Station for us this evening. Simon.
Duncan, when the government gave Transport for London a series of bailouts in the aftermath of the pandemic, it attached certain strings. One of them involves reforms to TfL's pension scheme. Ministers think there could be a saving of around £100 million a year. Not surprisingly, that has alarmed and angered the workforce and the unions. Last year, the RMT staged a series of strikes in protest. Now it's the turn of the drivers' union ASLEF to ballot its members with a view to calling strikes in March.
The options that the government is talking about of saving £100 million a year would mean people's retirement income being cut by up to a third. And that's utterly unfair on people who've spent their whole life working hard to deliver a public service and are now to find out that their expected retirement income will be drastically cut.
And Simon, there's also trouble ahead on the Elizabeth line.
Yes, after last week's rail strikes, commuters could be forgiven for thinking they might get a respite this week. But no, on Thursday, maintenance staff working on the Elizabeth line and signallers in the control room at Romford, they're all members of either the TWSA union or the Prospect union. They're planning to walk out. It's in a dispute over pay. They've been offered 4% this year. They want double that, a 4% increase. What it means is that the entire central section of the Elizabeth line from Paddington to Abbey Wood will come to a standstill. The first time that's happened since the line opened 8 months ago, and there will also be disruption to the other sections, to Shenfield, to Reading and to Heathrow Airport.
Simon, thank you very much. Simon Harris at Farringdon. The Mayor has confirmed to ITV News London that tube fares will rise by more than was expected. Sadiq Khan wanted to limit the hike to 4%, but now he says pressure from the government over the funding deal means journey costs will jump by almost 6%, adding to all the other rising costs of everyday life. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has more.
London's mayor was in party mood today. It's the 160th birthday of the Underground. But the celebrating will be short-lived. In the coming weeks, he has a difficult decision to make. Sadiq Khan must confirm this year's Transport for London fares increase. And he told ITV News the government funding agreement with TfL has forced his hand. The rise will mirror the 5.9% hike in national rail fares.
If we don't increase the fares by 5.9%, the government won't support us, so we've got to make cuts elsewhere. That's why it's really important for Londoners to realise the only reason that any fares will go up is because of the conditions attached by the government.
Last year, TfL fares went up by an average of 4.8%. This year, the Mayor hoped to limit the rise to just 4%. But he says the government's rail fares increase of 5.9% has tied his hands.
People are struggling as it is, and increasing bus and tube fare is just ridiculous.
It will still push me to kind of have to make more difficult choices than I already do.
It's a massive extra expense for people just trying to get by currently.
In a statement, the Department for Transport said it is for the Mayor of London to decide whether TfL fares increase in line with national fares. His critics dispute his assertion that he has no wriggle room, saying there are ways he could find extra money. The Conservatives are calling on the Mayor to reform TfL's pension scheme and to scrap the free travel perk, which allows TfL employees to nominate a partner, friend or family member living at the same address.
He blames the government, but the government has bailed him out to the tune of over £6 billion to cover the cost of COVID. And I think with this fares rise and with the ULEZ expansion coming in, 2023 is unfortunately going to be the year that the Mayor really hits Londoners in the pocket.
Many Londoners rely on buses, which currently have some of the lowest fares in Britain.
The government's introduced a 3-month £2 fare cap for buses outside of London. Now, of course, buses in London are much lower than that. Our bus fare is £1.65. You can take as many buses within an hour as you want for that. So we don't want our fares creeping up to match this new government figure, which wouldn't be fair for Londoners.
When Sadiq Khan was first elected, he introduced a partial fares freeze. It lasted 5 years. Then came COVID. Now, for the second year running, bus and tube fares are going up. Simon Harris, ITV News, Baker Street.
Good evening. It is a service so many Londoners rely on to get to hospital in an emergency. But today, some were forced to find their own way to A&E as ambulance staff walked out again in a row over pay. And for the first time, they were joined by 999 call handlers at 3 picket lines in the capital, with army personnel from Wellington Barracks also drafted in to help. With the latest, here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
In front of ambulance headquarters, striking paramedics and union officials lit a traditional picket line brazier to ward off the chill. At the back of the building in Waterloo, ambulances sat idle. Half of the capital's fleet of 400 were off the road.
Hopefully people won't call us today unless they absolutely need us, which I think, to be honest, should be an everyday occurrence, not just a strike day occurrence.
Even though we are striking, if someone calls us, we'll out or shout, because that's why we wear this uniform. We're here to help people.
This man, who had a fall at home, took a taxi to University College Hospital after trying to get an ambulance.
I had a short wait and then I spoke to an ambulance receptionist, and they said there was going to be a long wait, and because although I'm in pain and need to see somebody, I thought I would try and get here on my own.
Close to Buckingham Palace, Wellington Army Barracks was pressed into service as a makeshift military ambulance station. If London's ambulance service suddenly became overwhelmed, managers would first ask strikers on picket lines to go back to work. In theory, the troops would only be called in as a last resort. But at St Thomas's Hospital, we saw this ambulance leaving with a member of the Royal Marines, apparently part of the crew. And another military uniform was visible when an ambulance pulled up in Holborn. Ministers accused the unions of being unhelpful in planning emergency cover.
Unlike the Royal College of Nursing, who agreed a national minimum service level, the ambulance unions have refused to do that, insisted on local arrangements. Obviously, that makes contingency planning much more difficult in terms of safeguarding patient safety.
We know that on strike days, patient care will be stretched, and we work to make sure that we've got those emergency measures and the safety measures in place.
Ambulance bosses appealed to Londoners to only dial 999 if there was a threat to life or limb. But care homes like this one in Hampstead normally rely on ambulances for patients with less serious injuries.
Ambulance play a very vital role in the kind of service that we provide. Some are quite vulnerable, some old, and they are prone to falls. And at times we need, based on the severity of the case, we need the ambulance there and then.
At 5 o'clock, call handlers in the control room at Waterloo hung up their headsets and joined the 12-hour strike at the halfway mark. London Ambulance Service said it would be days rather than hours before things were back to normal. Simon Harris, ITV News.
Good evening. 8 months after opening with much fanfare, the Elizabeth line closed today, the latest to join industrial action in the capital over workers' pay. There was no service on the central bit of the line between Paddington and Abbey Wood. Staff say they're paid half of those who work on the tube and want the mayor to step in. The strike today has hit Canary Wharf particularly hard. Since the Elizabeth line opened, the area has seen a huge rise in footfall. So businesses are worried about the impact it will have, as our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
London's flagship commuter railway passed a new milestone today. Less than 8 months after it opened, the central section of the Elizabeth line was brought to a standstill by its first strike. Early morning passengers were confronted by closed stations.
I was just heading in on my normal day, and then there's no train, so I don't know if I'll be able to make it into work, so I might have to work from home.
Yeah, I'm running really late for work, and I literally just turned up and it's closed.
I had no idea it was going to happen, so probably going to take about an hour and a half more to get to work.
There were trains on the outer sections of the line, but none between Paddington and Abbey Wood, after signallers and maintenance staff walked out in a dispute over pay. TfL says around 600,000 people a day now use the Elizabeth line. For many of them, the daily commute has been transformed. Today's strike will be inconvenient, as well as a blemish on the line's short history. Two unions, the TWSA and Prospect, are angry that their members are paid less than other Transport for London employees who work on the underground. The unions point out that tube workers got an 8.4% pay rise in 2022, but the same offer to Elizabeth line staff is spread over 2 years, so 4% for 2022 and a further 4.4% in 2023. Can you understand why the unions, when they see tube workers getting twice what the Elizabeth Line workers are getting, might protest?
Tube workers are not getting twice what the Elizabeth Line workers are getting.
8.4%.
We're talking about 2 years here, both last year and the year to come. And there's also other parts of the offer we've said where we will look at payment for additional skills.
Are you embarrassed to be responsible for the first strike in the history of the Elizabeth Line?
Absolutely not. These are a great bunch of workers. They're very proud to work on the world's first fully digital railway, and they've only reached this point because the company will not talk to us seriously.
The strike was yet another blow to bars and restaurants still feeling the after effects of COVID and reeling from the recent rail strikes. The owner of this business in Canary Wharf thinks the strikers are being unreasonable.
The public sector was pretty much wholly paid through the pandemic. We lost 9 months of trade and had to make very, very deep sacrifices. And I think it's a very cruel blow to hospitality and all the other businesses that rely upon the ability to move within London.
The strike is likely to mean tomorrow morning's rush hour on the Elizabeth Line will start late.
Well, Simon is over at Mansion House, where the Mayor is expected to give his speech later. And there are calls, aren't there, for him to intervene in this dispute?
Yes, the TWSA union has written to the Mayor in his capacity as Chair of Transport for London, calling on him to take a personal involvement in the negotiations. And that's been echoed by his political opponents at City Hall. The Conservatives also say he should be doing more to try to stop further strikes.
He became mayor saying that he would have 0 days of strikes on London's public transport. And he's obviously failed to deliver that. So what we need from the Mayor is for him to step up, show leadership, and put a stop to this seemingly endless parade of strikes on our transport network. A spokesperson for the Mayor said the strikes reflected the impact of the pandemic on TfL's finances and the strict conditions imposed by the government during bailouts. But they added that the Mayor would continue to urge the unions to work with TfL to resolve the situation.
Well, let's talk about that big speech that he's due to give tonight. And he's going to touch on the subject of Brexit, isn't he? Because he's not very happy about it, is he?
Well, the Mayor's going to be giving a speech here at the Mansion House. It's for a banquet hosted by the Lord Mayor of London for the great and the good, the movers and shakers in local government. And he's expected controversially to say that the government is in denial over the damage done by Brexit to the economy and to call for a fresh debate on the merits of rejoining the single union and the customs union, which of course is not, Charlene, Labour policy.
OK, Simon, thank you.